get started.
Okay, great. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the second meeting of the month of April 21st, Tuesday. Thank you, everyone, for being in attendance and on time. We'll begin this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. For those of you who would like to participate, we'll begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight? First of all, is there anyone that would like to remove anything from the agenda tonight or modify the agenda? I would like to modify the agenda for item 7, adding item 7A1, a motion that I sent you, Commissioner Fisher. It is a motion for the board to, well, we'll get to it, but 7A1 about pursuing with the city of Burlington the reduction of the permit fees. So you'll see it and I'll be able to pull it up in the meeting to go over.
Okay, I'll second that motion.
So we'll add 7A1 to the item as an item. So may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Commissioner Carey, second. Commissioner Alwell seconds the motion to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the agenda has been approved. Thank you.
So, point of privilege, just a reminder, please unmute when you vote, and especially if you're voting nay or abstain, so that we can record your vote and we do a roll call. Thank you.
Great. Next on the agenda is public comment. Commissioner Fisher.
Okay. Get up my notes. Oops. Okay, so you must be connected to the Zoom meeting in order to participate in public comment. You cannot participate via Facebook or YouTube, or if you're watching this on RETN. If you wish to speak and are connected via phone, please hit *9. If you wish to speak and are connected via computer or the Zoom app, look for the raise hand icon, just like this. I'll see that you've raised your hand and we'll go down the list recognizing each person one at a time, and I have to do some work. So please, if you wish to speak at public comment, press *9 on your phone or hit the raise hand button in Zoom. Okay, Dr. Lang, please hold. Go ahead, Dr. Lang, go ahead.
I just want to confirm that everybody on the school board got the letter that I sent out this afternoon. That's all. It had 2 items, and that's only the beginning of my response to your funding sources. But thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at public comment? Last call for public comment, *9 or raise your hand in the app. Okay, thank you, Chairwell.
Great. Next on the agenda is board reflections. If there are any board members that would like to make any reflections at this time.
I would.
Commissioner Carey.
Yeah, I just want to remind people that there are some pretty interesting videos out there under the Seahorse Pride Instagram account involving the BHS mascot Ace, who is seen practicing social distancing around Burlington in different ways. And if you haven't seen it, You need to look at it. It'll be very entertaining for a little bit for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Thank you. Sorry.
I make a motion to accept the consent agenda. Do I need to do that?
Yep. I was going to ask, are there any items that anyone would like to remove, but it's only the minutes. So thank you, Commissioner Fisher. So Commissioner Fisher is the first. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Commissioner Waltz is the second. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the consent agenda is passed. Next is the chair's report. Very simply stated under the chair's report, I wanted to acknowledge per Superintendent Obang and our district leaders and our school board that we will begin as needed and in the vein of moving forward with our capability of our Zoom meetings, any committee meetings that would like to take place for the starting in the month of May. We will not have any in April due to COVID-19, but we would ask, and this is, you know, in unison with item B, the announcement, the public announcement and display of the committees going forward in this elected year of governing. Those are our committee chairs. I would like to add that Commissioner Sowers is going to join me on the Finance and Facilities meeting as co-chair. So thank you, Commissioner Sowers, for your leadership and partnership in that committee. And that the board officers would like to meet with each of the co-chairs and the board as a whole to discuss your goals, your committee goals for the ensuing year. We feel that it will add value, similar to what Superintendent Obang has always echoed. What is the goal of the committee? What will be the goal of the committee for the ensuing year in partnership with our district leadership? And so we will spend the next couple weeks working with the committees and the co-chairs to talk about our May meetings specifically and the goals of our May meetings, and then future for the year out. And I think that will help us in our governing and in support of the superintendent and district leaders. So if there are any comments, that concludes item A and B on the agenda and acknowledging those committees and moving forward in the month of May. So I'll take any questions from commissioners regarding the committees. Commissioner Ivanchik.
I just wanted to clarify, so we can go ahead and schedule our committee meeting for May. And do we have to have our goals for the committee for the coming year before that meeting?
That's what we'll address that over the next 2 weeks. We will talk to you as the board officers will reach out to you. So I think it's still work in progress. So we won't put that onus on everybody for the first month of May. So you can proceed with your May meeting, but even in that May meeting, we'd love to be able to, as a board, understand the goals of that, because we still are in COVID operation, and so we want to acknowledge that the district staff has, their COVID responsibilities, and we want to make sure that we're supporting the superintendent and district leaders in what we're asking of the district for the month of May if we do have committee meetings. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. All right. Well, seeing none, we will move on to the superintendent's report. Superintendent Obang.
Oh, sorry, I was unmuted. I was muted. So I've been doing this all day. I think I figured this out by now. Thank you all for your support in that last item in terms of considering staff needs around addressing COVID, and we'll be prepared to support the board committees in May for sure. Hope everyone's enjoying their April break and taking some time to reflect on what's happened this year thus far and preparing hopefully for an opening sometime soon. I do have some quick updates for you. Once again, during the break, we are operating our food services and also our childcare services for our essential workers, the first responders, and that seems to be going quite well. I won't go into the detail because you've been receiving the data and information. I'll do a better update when we come back and we're back engaged again. But those are the big things. I do want to talk about a memo that just came out yesterday around school construction, which I think would be interesting to the board, considering we do have a master plan around some construction. We have the BHS, the BTC reconditioning project. But since we've got Victor online tonight, I wonder, Victor, I'll give you an opportunity to share some information about the childcare, the progress of childcare, because I know you've been involved in that, and a few other items that I know you've been involved in. Victor has served as our liaison with the mayor's regular committee and has worked a lot of connections with their operations, with our operations as well too. So Victor, if I give you a minute before I go on to the school construction update.
Sure, happy to. Hi, everybody. So yeah, right before we actually closed school, Christy Galise, Stacy Curtis, and I were given the task of trying to create a childcare system from scratch, which is certainly something I wasn't trained to do, but never shy away from a project. And we had it up and running within 2 weeks, which was great. We decided to go against what the governor was suggesting, which was put 10 students in a classroom. It didn't make any sense to us, especially we're talking about kids of essential workers who we need to keep healthy. So we created a proposal, presented it to the governor's office, and ultimately actually presented it with Dan French, with Yao, and it was approved. So we have a child care center going. It's 1-to-1, so one family per child care worker at the school site. They use the same classroom every day. There's a health check that happens first thing in the morning. All the food is inside the room, and the only time they're outside of the classroom is if they're going outside to access the outdoors. And then those rooms are cleaned every night by custodial staff 3 or 4 hours after the last student leaves. And so this was an incredible endeavor, working with Marty and his folks, with Christy, with Doug, with Stacy, and with the city. In addition, we're providing subsidies for parents to have childcare inside the home, because a lot of families have odd schedules, particularly ones working at the hospital. And all of the money for this will be ultimately reimbursed by the state. And I don't know where we are with that. Nathan would have more to say about that. But so that's what was approved by the governor's office, which was great to see. And the response has been incredible from paraeducators and some after-school folks who are helping staff things. We've also partnered with the YMCA and King Street, some of their after-school folks who were laid off. Some of them have been providing the childcare in the homes. We just act as an intermediary for that. So basically we reimburse the family hires whoever they want. In addition, we're partnering with Fletcher Food Library, and at all the food sites, there are now books being distributed to kids for free. And soon to come, starting next week, we'll be delivering toys as well. Wow's Toys, a company in Virgins, connected with us, and we received 6 pallets of toys yesterday for age 3 through 12. And with King Street, those are going to get distributed at those food sites as well. Claire, yes, it's awesome.
Right.
So, yep.
Thank you, Victor. It's lots of good news, lots of good work happening with our staff during this period of time. I'm just thoroughly impressed with the enthusiasm that our staff have engaged to try to keep our community safe and continue forward. So we'll keep you updated on that. But I did want to share with you the guidance that came out yesterday around school construction. As everyone knows, there was a stay home, stay safe order on March 24th by the governor to keep all businesses and construction sectors suspended. As of yesterday there was an executive order that expanded that restart of the economy, and part of that was looking at construction, and that's a big piece of the work that we do. And so I wanted to just articulate a few points that the state has permitted businesses to operate on. So outdoor work may resume operations with a maximum of 2 workers per location. Interior construction may occur in unoccupied structures with no more than 2 workers following social distancing standards. I think most of these parameters we've been kind of following in terms of making sure we're not doing anything that's not essential when we respond to emergency type situations. But now we have an opportunity to to address things that come across. In terms of the guidance talks a little bit about finance around construction, and some of the pieces that they've talked about is if you have funds that are allocated for construction projects this year and you haven't used it in your budget, it will be allowed to be carried over for next year. And also, if you have some surpluses, you'll be allowed to carry that over for the next year as well too. So that's good to know that you don't lose that money, or you don't have to find ways to spend it if it's not appropriate to be utilizing at that point. They put the construction project into two sectors: large projects and small projects. And they talk about bonds and small projects as well too, how to proceed if you're in that process. For us right now, we don't have any sort of critical projects that are need to happen during this COVID period. And as the months go on, we'll get more guidance in. So I'm not going to talk too much about the summer and the work that could start with many of our projects about summer, because I anticipate further guidance and hopefully the change of the slope by June, July, and the board will be updated by our Director Spalding in terms of what actions we can take and what we cannot take. But right now, it looks like we're in good shape in terms of the work that we do have to do, and the financing for those pieces that are not in jeopardy if we hold on to it to plan for a future date, which is next year. Okay. So that is sort of the brief summary for the break in terms of what's happening, and I'll end there if there's any questions around the COVID update.
I think just for the board, Yao, if you could, and I know you talked about it last meeting, and some commissioners, when I checked in with them this week, asked about the financial picture of the district in relation to COVID. And I know that you shared with us May 8th will be your next check-in with the state as to procedures. And then, leaving it to you and Nathan to guide us. I just want to put it out there that board members are concerned, given that draft memo, and we're looking to support you and be educated as you get educated, and need our support to what the impact on the district, positive and negative, financially.
Yeah, I did mention that last time. Once again, the memo that you received from our attorneys, that was a draft memo. That was just for your information, so that has been enacted. But we have reviewed that, and there aren't any implications immediately for us in terms of doing that. At the next meeting, I had conversations with Director Lavery, and he's already working on some pieces. We'll do a COVID finance update for the board. I know there's questions even in the community about, I spoke to it last time around, where's the money coming from for the food, and are we going in the hole because of COVID, or all those pieces we'll be able to address. But right now we're in good shape in terms of running the operations. And there was something urgent, I would communicate with the chair and communicate it with the board if we had to do any sort of emergency pieces. The other piece around the finance piece is next board meeting. I'll also have our Director of Human Resources will have some items for the board, which impacts on staffing and which be cost. So there'll be some decision points for the board members to make based on what's happening or what's coming forward that Z will bring forward as part of the update. So there'll be a finance and human resources that'll come forward, and then you'll have all the information to be able to say, okay, going forward, these are things we're going to make decisions on. Either can you make a decision now or think about it and let us know, and we'll have to play with the timelines. You're absolutely right that the agency talked about May 8th as the date where they will make a decision about school closure, school calendar, and just going forward and all the other things. So everything will fall into place once we know what's going to happen with the rest of the year. That could come sooner than later, right? But May 8th is their drop date. But we'll be preparing to do a good analysis for the board for the finance and human resources. There's something that happens in between that we need an urgent response, which I don't anticipate. We'll definitely communicate with the chair and say, here's a memo about this. We might have to call a special meeting, or we just need board support to take action if there is something that is in. But right now, I'm not anticipating anything like that. We seem to have things in order in our business office, and our human resources department have been sort of handling all the operational pieces, and as well as property services in terms of the deferred maintenance work and things like that. So I would say we're in good shape right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions on the COVID update? Okay, seeing none, I'm gonna move to Z because she had the monitoring report, and I think that we had done this report already, and she was coming back to do an update. So hopefully it's be quick, and we can have more time on the other items that you have on the agenda. So Z, I'll ask you to speak to that monitoring report.
Right, yes, thank you. So it's more of a housekeeping item. This information was shared with Chair Wall in January, but we wanted to just make sure that we updated the monitoring report 2.2. So the information that was sent to the board and made available to you are those highlights. So there was one addition. There was a question about the number of grievances that were carried over from FY19 to 20. And there was one, and then there was also the additional language that was added to 2.2 and under letter D, and I've added that information in as well.
Chair Wool or Claire, Chair Wool or Z Anderson Brown, does the entire board have that communication, including the new members?
Which information? The new monitoring
email response with the responses to the updates on the on that policy, on that monitoring policy.
I sent the email directly to the board chair.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Claire, you're still muted.
Sorry, so you have it sent to me.
I sent it to you in January.
Okay. All right, let me, so, but we reviewed this after the meeting?
We reviewed this after the meeting. There were 2 questions that were asked, so I did the follow-up email, and now we're just making sure that we capture it in the monitoring report. So next year when we go to do the monitoring report, that this will be part of the document. So it's
All
a
right.
housekeeping item for today.
Okay, do you mind sending it now and then I can distribute it to the board? I'm sorry, that's my mistake if I didn't forward it on.
You mean the updated monitoring report?
Yeah, the document.
Bonnie, are you on?
Send the update that I know you did that back in January. Just resend it back to the chair, and then she can distribute it back to the
Okay.
to the entire
That's my,
board. Right?
I thought in the meeting, I thought that was late in the updating. That's why it wasn't on the board docs. My fault.
No, I'm sorry. I think we're speaking in 2 different lanes. So the monitoring report I sent out to Bonnie to have it attached. Maybe it didn't make it to the actual board docs.
Yeah.
But let me, I will send it to you along with the monitoring report so you can distribute it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think you have a hand up. Somebody's got a hand up, Chair Wool.
I didn't see, sorry.
All right, Chair Wall. It's Commissioner Fisher.
Thanks.
So I'm just, I'm a little confused. So Superintendent Obeng, are you asking us to approve this updated, amended report?
I'm not quite sure, actually, because I thought it was resolved back in January, and then for some reason we had to bring it back because Director Brown did make some corrections after the meeting in January and then send that communication, but obviously didn't get the communication, so I thought we were done. So then it came back here, so I'm assuming it was just coming back because people just wanted to make sure that she responded to those 2 questions, right? The board had already received it back then and said, please make these corrections, and then she did that, so.
All right, so my suggestion is the board officers will review, and if necessary, we'll put it on a future agenda so that board members can see the document and then ask questions if necessary.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no questions, I'm going to move to the next item, which is the equity inclusion report, and we have 3 staff members, Victor, Sparks, and Karen, there she is, here to speak to it. And look, I am really happy to have the board receive this document because there's been an iteration of change over the last several years in terms of how we look at the equity data And I remember when I first arrived, we had a data report, and it was called an equity data report. Then we had some philosophical discussions around ensuring inclusion of special ed and other categories that are sort of vulnerable included into the document. And then we had Karen who came along, who put her lens to it in terms of how we collect data, how we look at data, and we've had some changes in terms of how we get those metrics and pieces like that. And so this last report I think it's a great template in terms of how the district and the board can go forward in looking at how they analyze equity and inclusion information. I would suspect that the board would use this document in their summer retreat to set some priorities and goals around this area moving forward. That's what we didn't have previously in terms of specific. We're just generating reports, but there were no specific sort of targets or reports. But this now is an opportunity. I think it's in good shape, and Karen's done a good job of having some data sets that she can use, and the board can use it as a tool to set some goals for itself. But tonight, I know it's not as elegant as in person, but we do have the 3 staff members here who are going to just sort of highlight some of these pieces. And I would ask the board to actually do a more robust conversation in person when we're out of COVID, because I think it takes some understanding and some unpacking of some of this material to really look at what actions you need to put in place to improve the standards here. So I don't know who's going to go first, Victor or Karen or Sparks, but take it away.
Karen, are you starting out?
Victor, you're on mute.
I'm
Victor,
muted.
yeah.
I muted, unmuted, and now I'm unmuted again. Bonnie Ryder, I sent you a link to sort of to a presentation format for tonight, and I asked if I mean, it was really recent, if you could share that with board members rather than share my screen.
Is it actually the equity report?
No, it's the presentation. It's called Copy of School Board Equity Report Presentation. This is sort of what we would have used if we were in person. Within that is embedded the report itself, which I know everybody already has. But we could get started regardless.
Okay, I just sent it to everybody.
Thank you.
And is that something, Victor, do you want Mike to pull it up on the screen, Mike?
If he'd like to, it's fine. I mean, we have that link. You could even share that link out. We have it so that anyone with the link can view that.
Okay.
Well, this is a public meeting, so if it's something that we're going through,
it's more of an outline of how we're going to go through it. That's what it is. But yeah.
okay, please hold.
Yeah, you're talking, but we don't hear you.
Yeah, it's more of an outline, so you can have that or not, but the report itself is posted and will be posted. But this is sort of the team sort of notes and talking notes. So, but
yep.
So I just say, just go ahead and start.
Okay.
Great.
I will start to say that this has been a year-long process to now, basically. It was April of last year where a small group of us got together to consider sort of what Yao just said, which is how can we come up with a report that's actually used more in our district and that's accessible to a broad range of people. And the previous 5 years of reports were a great place to start, and we really felt like this is an opportunity to evolve to something more useful and more accessible. So ultimately it was me, Karen, Sparks, Miriam, and Christy Galise who took on the bulk of this work, and we really started working on it. I want to say it was this fall. I'd have to actually check my timeline on that. What became pretty clear to us was that this was we started we started in June. This was a much bigger undertaking than we realized, both from a data perspective, but also a format perspective. So what we did was we went into some research mode of sort of seeing what's out there. And sorry, I've jumped ahead. I just realized because of the screen, because I'm jumping around. Mike, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So what we're going to do pretty quickly, this is what we call a modified tuning protocol. That's an actual link there where it says tuning protocol. We're going to talk for a little bit. I know Miriam's name is up there. We should put Sparks' name there instead. We were all going back and forth who was going to be on the call today. We'll present a little bit. We'll ask if there's clarifying questions. And then we're making an assumption that commissioners have had an opportunity to read the report. And so then we're really looking for some warm and cool feedback. So what do you like about it? What works for you? What questions do you have? What are ways to improve this in the future? And then you have some conversation about it. And if you want us to, we can give some reflection as well. We're sort of feeling that this is an iterative process at this point in time. Next slide, please. So where we landed was very much, we're enamored with the New Orleans School District equity report that they use. And so we modeled our report in a lot of ways on that. If you were to go Google that and look at it, you'll see some similarities there. Essentially what we did is we broke this down into some sections. Hang on one sec, my computer just glitched totally on me.
And I'm getting a lot of noise. Can people mute their audio?
Yeah, I think that's actually my house. Hey,
Oh,
Loy.
okay, sorry, Victor.
Loy, I'm gonna need you to stop making noise and coming in here. Thank you. It's always nice when you're telling your 18-year-old what to do and what not to do. Anyway, we divided into sections. The biggest differences is design. So it's very visual now. I believe it's a 20-page report that's printed, and then online there's a bunch of appendices as well with data tables. So we were looking to make a much more accessible report, one that was visually appealing. We wanted to focus on certain data points, and that's something we definitely stole from New Orleans, where they looked at, you know, why does this section matter? What does the data say? Where have we had success? And where do we have some shortcomings? So really highlight some things. And that's where, as Yao said, we could get some direction from you moving forward for the next report, because the group of us are already starting now on coming up with what that report's going to look like. So hopefully we can have that to you in the fall and not be 6 months late this next year. So if you could go to the slide now that says teacher characteristics. Thank you. So this is just an example. So we added this piece. Karen, did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so we just wanted to highlight a few of the sections that are new and the things that are new that we haven't reported on before. So we added a teacher characteristics section. That's something that the New Orleans report has, and also many other reports, because there's been a lot of research on the importance of teacher, demographics, race, and qualification. So we thought it was important to start including this data in our report. Uh-oh, what happened? Okay. So that's there, and let's keep moving. And I'm not going to tell you what it says because you already have a report. The next, another section we added, we've never had before, is a student voice section. And as a restorative district, we felt it was just of paramount importance to have students have a voice in this report and be involved in this equity work. So we would love for this section to really evolve over time. There's some really promising work that students are doing. The youth participatory action research work that has been piloted at Edmonds Middle School with our UVM partners. The Burlington City and Lake students have been really involved in looking at data in the city and thinking about equity, and actually working with us on this report a little bit. So right now we have some student quotes and things in here, but we hope that this section gets much stronger with actual student generated data and leadership or their own writing. And then the next section, if you go to the next slide, is this isn't a section actually. This is a bit of data, and I wish Miriam were here because she speaks so passionately about this. This is something that is tracking our students who are former ELs. We've been calling it Ever EL, and so instead of just looking at our current EL students, we're looking at students who've exited our EL program, and we want to see, what kind of outcomes we're getting with these students. And so we have data on them in here. We're starting to track these students, and I know Miriam is excited, and we're all excited to be looking at that in more depth over time. How are they doing? What is it like for students who arrive here at different ages and with different levels of English, and how can we best serve that population? So you'll see that throughout the report. And now you can go to the next slide. Okay, and this is just, I think, Victor, you were going to do this just maybe showing the table of contents. Is that right? Oh, is that Mike?
All right.
Yeah.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. A bunch of stuff flashed on my screen. What I was saying is, and then Sparks afterwards, if you could give some perspective as well, because you were involved in the previous 5 years of equity reports as well. So the walkthrough was just meant to actually go through the table of contents in the report. And so, Mike, if you could click on that link and then go down to the table of contents, if you could show that. Perfect. So these are just the sections. So there's a superintendent statement, and then there's student characteristics, teacher characteristics, students on equity, that's that voice piece, which is a pretty small section right now. As Karen said, we're hoping to have that be bigger. Access, so students accessing their education, and then opportunity to learn, slightly different. That's more of what some people are calling the opportunity gap or the achievement gap. And then climate, which traditionally what we've done in the past is we're looking at suspension data. We're also understanding there's an intersection between that now and restorative practices specifically, as well as some other approaches that we're taking. And so those are just the different sections. And then there's the appendices. And so the appendices, if you were to go into those, we're not going to do that right now, but if you were to go into those, you would see that it's very much similar to what have been in the previous 5 years of equity and inclusion reports. Sparks, did you want to add something?
He's probably unmuted, or keep going there.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Early on, when we started meeting, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was the student voice piece, because as we look at this document and as we look at past equity reports, we didn't have anything that actually represented students. So as it's already been stated, moving forward, we are going to allow students to work with us on writing different parts of this that actually represents student voice. The other part of that, what we want to do as we move forward with the report, we want to make sure it is aligned with other work that the district is doing, such as restorative practices. And now, as we really think about data, we're going to have to make room to also include the work that we are now doing with the Department of Justice. Because as we think about the report, one of the primary reasons the report was late was because early on, Karen and I had conversations about the data and understanding that the data that we had been collecting was not accurate. So one of the things that we do know in this report, the data is more reflective of what's actually going on in the district. So even if you look at suspensions and some of the other data points, the thing that we do know is the data is more accurate. And as we really start to collect real data, the numbers around suspensions and that sort of thing may have an uptick, but overall across the district, we do know those numbers are going down. The other part I want to just talk about briefly in the work as we move forward is making sure it is all aligned and we actually know what we're doing with the report. In prior years, we didn't really know what we wanted that report to do. So now we're talking about really looking at different sections to make sure it is a true reflection of what the district is doing, what the district has done, and giving us an opportunity to use this information moving forward to make more thorough and accurate data-driven decisions.
Thanks, Sparks. Keep going, Victor.
Yep. I was just making sure I was unmuted. I just put in the chat to all panelists and attendees the link from board docs to the actual report, realizing that that might be helpful to some folks right now. So just lost my, there we go. So I guess I would say at this point, if board members could just take a couple minutes and just jot down, like just maybe some clarifying questions that you have, or even 30 seconds to think about that if there's some clarifying questions. And then if there are some, we'll respond to those, but then take a couple minutes to think about some warm and cool feedback for us to help really engender a good conversation. So are there any clarifying questions? Like, I don't understand something.
Are you moderating this part, Victor, or are you asking the chair to do that?
Well, I'm just asking the question.
Oh, okay.
Anyone can moderate. Yeah, I can't see because, I mean, I can only see, well, actually, maybe I can.
Can you take
No, I
the-
guess with sharing the screen.
Mike, then we can see everyone. There you go.
Perfect. Yeah.
So at this time, any board members have any clarifying questions? Thank you, Victor and Karen and Sparks for being on the call and creating this slide deck so that we can walk through it. And yes, as we spoke today online, all the board members have had this. The DE&I committee distributed to us as well. And we're appreciative of allotting time on the agenda to go through it. And thank you for walking us through your presentation.
Chair Will, I would suggest that you use this document as a tool for your summer retreat to actually really do an unpacking as you're planning your next steps around priorities and goals and things like that. Because now that the staff has done the analysis, they've got some baseline good data that we can kind of start using in setting your goals and things. So I think it'd be a good tool to use. I would invite you to invite the team to come to your retreat and put a portion around unpacking this in support of aligning priorities.
Thank you, will do. Commissioner Alwell?
Yes, what I kind of missed in the report was more on special ed, and I don't know, data to just say, there's so many kids on IEPs and stuff, but just like you were talking about looking at English language learners and the ones that have gone through the program and how they're doing, I would also say that I would hope that we would do something similar with data around that, because I think that kids on IEPs, and I know that's a huge, variation from what all those IEPs are, but I think you have to show there that they're progressing also. And I feel when we're talking about disabilities, that is a big thing that often gets forgotten when we're talking about equity. And so I can't tell you how I think it should be done, but I just think that it has to be broader than just saying that there's this many kids on IEPs or something.
If I could just quick bit of feedback there. Thank you, Kathy. I agree with you. What I hear you saying, and I want to clarify this to make sure it's right, is that we'd be looking at growth for kids who are on IEPs. Because what we do have is we actually show some real gaps. Like we have percentages of how many kids are on an IEP in a certain category, in a certain chart, and then how their performance does not match that. And so you see this disparity between kids who are on an IEP and who aren't. That to me is useful to a degree, but for me, I would want to know what kind of growth are kids making who are on an IEP over time. So they might start here and then they progress over time to here. And that's what we'd want to see. That doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be exactly the same as a student who doesn't have a disability.
Yeah.
So is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, I am, but I don't
Okay.
just only mean
Okay.
academic growth. I also mean social growth. I mean, I think it would be, we have inclusion, but we don't have inclusion. I mean, a lot of those kids are in the classroom, but, they aren't part of really the classroom. And so I just feel for them a lot of times because they don't have a lot of friends. And we sometimes, I think, don't go do the extra mile to really push that part of it, that part of inclusion, to really make them a part of the classroom. And I know that it's hard to put into words, but when you go into it, when you hear from parents that their kids that are really disabled really don't have friends and all these other things, and I think, God, they're sitting in these classrooms all day and they really don't have any friends. And I mean, for me, that's just, it's sad. It's very sad. So I think that we need to, as a school, system, make them more part of the system and look at that in this equity report, because maybe that will force a bit more of them becoming truly included.
Thank you, Commissioner Alwell. So just for time, I see the number of commissioners, Commissioner Hadji, Commissioner Sowers, Commissioner Gulick. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Commissioner Waltz, Commissioner Ivanchik, and Commissioner Vanderputten. So I'm going to ask that we all keep our questions to a minute, and that Victor, depending on the level of response, we'll be able to either table it and you'll get back to us. You'll be writing these down as you've asked for, but that if there are some things that could be answered in the immediate, that you will do so. So I'll start with Commissioner Hadji.
Can I add while he's unmuted, Victor, if you could also just capture these, and we'll give board members an opportunity after this to send more information, because we're really just capturing information. There'll be another conversation later on. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for presenting the information. My question is regarding the student voice piece, which I think is a really crucial part of the report. So I wanted to say that's a great move on that part. And my question is, how is the student voice collected, and how is that presented in the report? So what type of questions are asked?
Aaron, do you want to respond to that?
I can respond to that.
Okay.
So as we move forward, and I think that's an excellent question, Commissioner Hadji, and welcome to back to the district in a different way. And exactly as we move forward, including students, we anticipate working with some of the existing student groups, some of the new American student groups, some of the students that we have already worked with, But first and foremost, we want to include students at a level that they feel comfortable and they feel included. So we have not put all the pieces in place, but we do have a lot of existing student groups that we will be counting on as we move forward to really help us to think about how student voice is going to be represented in this document. Because what we don't want to do is create a process that adults create and then invite students to it. We'd like to have the students at the table right from the beginning as we really think about the work moving forward.
Thank you.
Next will be Commissioner Sowers.
Unmute. We can't hear you. I think she's frozen.
Now she's frozen. Oh, hold on. Let me unmute you again. No, can't hear you.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Gulick.
Yes.
You can send us, I'm typing notes, but you can also just send us written notes if you want.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. Warm feedback. I think the format is awesome. It was very readable and it was really enjoyable to read and look at. So thank you. My question was also about student voice. When I first started reading the report, I thought it was about how student voice is part of the educational experience in Burlington, and I was really excited about that. But I guess I read it wrong. So I guess it's a little bit of cool feedback, just making sure that, that and maybe it's something that I missed, that this is student voice just in relationship to gathering data for the report, right? Correct? Okay.
No. So as we think about student voice, we have to look at the data piece, but we also have to look at hearing from students what's working in our system and in our structure, what's not working, and how do we actually pay attention to authentic student voice when we make decisions, how it impacts the budget, and so on and so forth. But it's not just about how do we collect data. It's also around the social emotional learning. It's about all the pieces that involve students in the educational process that they have historically been left out of.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Sparks.
You're welcome.
All right, next is Commissioner Sowers. Are you back?
Again? Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yep.
Okay, I just took my headset off. Sorry, you guys. So I thank you for the report. I was wondering about creating goals from this report that we do in the board, like you had suggested, but what would be helpful for me is to see year-to-year data so that we could see progression in areas and we could see what areas are working and what areas aren't working. Because when I just look at numbers like this, I could see what I would like to have happen, but it doesn't give me a snapshot so much of what the areas that we are making progress on year to year and where we aren't making progress. So that's what I would like to see.
Thank you.
That is something Karen and I talked this morning a bit, and we looked at previous year's reports. We would welcome an invitation to come back, and maybe that's a summer thing, to sort of look at the data that we had from the previous 4 or 5 years and then put that against this year's. And maybe we have to actually even go back and sort of backtrack and create some data that aligns better with our report. But totally agree with you, Kendra. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Waltz.
Unmute.
Sorry, I thought I did. Speaking of left out, I always notice that 504 plans or kids on a 504 plan are not separated from IEP. I also know that the district hasn't been tracking financial things allocated to 504, to serving 504 students. And, you know, we're talking about measuring social emotional growth. And I think kids on behavioral plans fall into that category more times than not. But for one, Victor, maybe you could just shed some light on this. Why is IEP also considered, or is it considered also 504, or is it not? Are we tracking 504 kids? Is that reflected in the equity report?
I'll let Karen answer that question from the data perspective.
I can answer that. So in this report, 504s and IEPs are not just in this report. They're not the same. They're separate. And in this report, we don't have information on 504. So I would agree with you that that's an area that we should consider looking into. And I agree. So that's something that we might be able to speak with Laura Nugent about and do some work on. And we'd love to consider that for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ivanchik?
Hi, thanks for bringing this report to the full board. I know I heard about it at the February 20th DE&I committee meeting, and you got a lot of my specific comments then. I just wanted to make some comments on the student voice section, because aside from student quotes scattered throughout the report, I don't see anything special. On your index, you say that students on equity is on page 9, but if you go to page 9, it's access. It's really accessibility. So I don't know if any of you had noticed that. My other question is, Karen and Sparks mentioned that you will be looking for student-generated data. So I was wondering how that would work, because I would think that would have to be part of a student, a class action or something that students get credit for, or it's not going to happen. And then I also am wondering why the report has not been posted on the website. I know you've been super busy and this COVID crisis came up, but I know it's something that you're proud of and you worked hard on. And in my mind, it would be like, that would be like the final step, put it on the website. And then my last question is about timing and future reports. So typically these reports came out in October, and that was because then we could use the data to hopefully influence the following school year. And so with, you know, the lateness of this report, that we can't use this data to influence next school year. And so I'm wondering when next year's report is going to come out, and it's probably going to be a bit of a mess with, you know, no school in session for the last 2 or 3 months of the school year.
I think you can use this tool in your summer retreat to look at next year. You still have that opportunity to kind of use this tool. I would say it's an invitation to ongoingly reflect back. And a lot of the information, I know Karen can speak to this, is baseline in terms of changing the structure, so we can put in a way they can do year-over-year collection of that pieces. But I do like the pieces around the student collection of data piece. I mean, that's a piece the team has really identified, and there's so many different ways to do it. And so it'll be interesting to get the students to speak about how they think the data should be collected. So I praise the team for not jumping too far ahead and making sure they have an opportunity to get students to give some voice about how data should be collected about them, what's meaningful to them as well too.
I do want to actually thank you, Monica. You've now caught the second mistake that Karen and I have now found just today. So I totally understand the confusion, because you mentioned the access piece. The table of contents is wrong.
Exactly.
No, it's like literally wrong. Like
it says access is page 10, but it's really page 9.
Correct. And so it should say students on equity is page 8, and then access should say 9. No. The other mistake, and this isn't like a game show to do this right now, but honestly, there's a mistake that appears 4 times on one page, and whoever finds that, when we're all done with this, I'll buy you a coffee or something else. So whoever emails me that first. We caught that this morning, and we're like mortified that we didn't.
What does Commissioner Ivanchik get for finding the other errors?
My undying appreciation.
Well, maybe you can change this before you put it on the website.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think she should get a copy for that. And we can't wait to put it on the website. We're excited to share this. So thank you for that encouragement.
So could we, speaking to that without sounding obnoxious, Superintendent O'Bang, could we, target May to put it, correct the, the typos or corrections, and then that be a goal to see it up on the website?
Yeah, I'd put it up tomorrow if I could. I think it's up to the team to make the changes first, and then we'll put it up.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner Bonjic. Commissioner Vanderputten.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. It's nice to meet the three of you here tonight for the first time. And thank you for this report. I'm not sure if this is a question or feedback. I guess I'll try to frame it as a question. But looking at it, I noticed there were the SBAC scores and the AP classes and the honors classes given as metrics, which I think is a really good start. And I'm not familiar with the New Orleans report that you were basing this on. I'm wondering if it's possible to expand this in looking at true equity to include things like elective classes or sports or the music program, because I think that could be another piece of reflecting true equity. Like, I just think that sometimes these, especially the SBAC scores, can be kind of muddied by student experience. So I'm just wondering how much further this could be expanded to get the whole picture, and if that's been talked about.
Thanks, Polly. Spoken as a teacher. So the reason we actually chose those metrics that we had there is those are the ones we've used in the past. And that's not necessarily a good reason, right? But we wanted to stay consistent that way. But yeah, I love the idea of thinking about how do we expand those other measures? How would we show with an equity inclusion report access and potentially success in those elective classes, those unified art classes, those types of things? And what does that look like when you disaggregate that? Who takes those classes and how do they do? And who takes not just Art 1, but who takes Art 2 and Art 3, and not just French 1, but French 3 and French 4. Yeah.
Well, so I'm thinking too of like kids who are multilingual, or about sports programs that require really expensive equipment and how that can be an equity issue for kids, or lessons that require a lot of money and how that's being accessed and by whom, I think could give us a really good snapshot of the district and who's getting what and how.
Thank you. Commissioner
Thank
Fisher?
you. I think that really speaks to some of the other comments as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher, next.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better. Thank you. I was looking at this report versus prior years, especially last year's, and so obviously the look and feel of this is miles better. And I was also thinking about Commissioner Sauer's point about, hey, there's not historical data, right? Last year there was at least 2 years worth of data. We could look at things like suspension data and say, here's where we're trending. And Sparks, you're talking about us driving decision making with the data, which I am all about, as you know. So I think my question and thinking about, we're also waiting to get an interim report on the 1.1 policy, right? Reducing disparities, which is pretty closely tied to this. And so I guess my question, is who is this report for? Is this report for members of the public and the community? Is this for people who are looking to move to Burlington or potentially sending their kids to the district? Or is this for the board? Or is this for the staff? Because there's a lot of stories in here. And if this is used to drive decision making, I want more data, right? If it's used as a let's just call it a PR for our district, right? Then that's a different set of content that we need to put in here. So I'd encourage you as a team to talk about what is the goal of this report versus the 1.1 report that you're giving to the board.
Mike, and we did have those conversations because we asked ourselves the same question. Not only the intent of the report, but who's the audience? And that's something that we can continue talking about, but overall, it has to be for the public overall. And so that would include the board, that would include the entire Burlington community. But that was definitely a conversation that we did have. And as we think about the data and the district making data-driven decisions, what we also know as we do this work with the Department of Justice, we're going to have more data that we have to really think about. How do we start to really incorporate those pieces in the report, but also how do we use that data to drive the work further?
Okay, Commissioner Waltz?
I just want to remind, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I just want to remind Mike that the equity report was a long time ago strategy / recommendation from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. It came from the board. So essentially the board should be figuring out the audience. Of course, the players, you know, Karen, Sparks, Victor, of course, they're going to identify the audience, but we should not shift total respect. You know, I want the board to say, hey, we're responsible for this.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is this, I don't remember seeing this in the board policies. So it's not something that, I hear what you're saying. We initiated this. So maybe this is a conversation to have at the E&I over the next few months to say, you know, what is, to review the purpose of this and compared to the monitoring goals.
In a nutshell, we're trying to find out ways to better serve our students and close the achievement gap. How we do that, we want to be able to make decisions based on data. The equity report is giving us a snapshot of where we're doing well, where we're not doing well in serving our students.
So I would say for me, if we're trying to drive decision making, what I'm looking for is trending and what work we've done in certain areas and whether it's had the intended impact, right? So if we talk about a program to do training around suspensions, right? We've talked about that for a couple of years, right? And to be able to see that ticking down of the number of suspensions, you know, there was last year's report had a great, it was 300. I remember the numbers going down and you could see, hey, this program had the impact it intended. For me, that's what I'm looking for in a report that's supposed to be driving decision making.
Can you add this to your super long list of topics that we need to discuss? Please and thank you.
Sure, well, I can have closing remarks if you're done.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And it's interesting you brought that conversation up. And the reason why I keep saying for the board retreat is that, yeah, this equity data report was initiated from the board actually prior to my arrival. And if you look back, the iteration of it has kind of changed, right? And DEI committee had it. And I think every other year we've gotten some different direction in terms of what we wanted for that report. And a lot of it was focused around suspension at one point. So that's why I'm inviting the board to kind of really take this document and then look at what's the purpose of doing this report and how's it going to help you to determine some priorities and set out the course moving forward. Otherwise, we'll just keep revising. But I think I really like what staff has done to bring it to this level, and I think that it gives you an opportunity to kind of look at what your goals are and then ask for the type of data that's going to help you make decisions. I think Commissioner Fisher and Commissioner Walsh is accurate in terms of being able to identify an area and have some trending information that you can say, okay, we've done that, but then you got to connect that with your budget plan in terms of supporting actions that are going to help doing that. One of the big actions that came out a couple of years ago from the DEI committee was around the suspensions. Hence, we supported restorative practices as a bigger strategy as a district to do suspension, and that we kept the eye on that prize. So there's a really good example there. So the other areas that you're talking about, you can kind of narrow down and magnify that and put that in as a piece. But I'll leave that for your next conversation in the summer, wherever you decide. And I know the staff will be happy to engage with you to help you do that. So thank you, Chair Wolf. Thank you, board, for listening and receiving this information. And we'll have it posted up as soon as they make the correction.
Great, and again, thank you, Superintendent Bang, Victor, Karen, and Sparks for being on the call and presenting the report, and thank you, DE&I committee for leading this work with the liaison with the board. And all reiterating everything that we said, we'll look to your leadership as well as we approach May. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye, Victor and Karen. Thanks.
Victor.
Thank you so much. And Sparks. Next on the agenda is the committee reports. As co-chair of the Finance and Facilities Committee, along with the, Commissioner Pillsbury, I present to you tonight timely information. Tom Peterson, the owner's project manager, is here to walk through the slide deck that you have gone through. Again, we understand and we've heard the board's feedback. We don't want to go through the same thing. If you've digested the slide deck, and we will go over it in broad strokes, we won't go through it detail by detail, but this is a big project and a tremendous amount of work. And this is the finish line for the schematic design process. So the importance of this meeting, as much as I said, we'll go through it in a bird's eye view. There will be, if there are questions, now is the time. This is the most important meeting for the board as it relates to the schematic design phase, which is the conclusion of this entire year's work, and would lead us to the next phase of the project, which is the design development stage. The design development stage is the real stage that gives us the blueprint to actually go out to bid come January 2021. The schematic design does not give us the guts of a true blueprint to be able to go out to bid to vendors to build this campus. So I just want to preface that by saying the goal of this item, and Tom Peterson, if you've looked at the slide deck, and we'll walk through it again, but it is the crossing the finish line of the schematic design process, which has been this year-long process. So with that, welcome Tom Peterson, and Commissioner Fisher, can you pull up that slide deck?
I'll get it up here.
Okay. Or Tom Peterson, great.
Let me see. View full screen. Can everybody, well,
there.
Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to just recap. We were, the last update that I did for your board was March 10th. That was exactly 6 weeks ago. During that time, we had completed the schematic design, and the contractor had finished their estimate for schematic design, and we had also engaged a third-party company that specializes in doing reconciliation estimates. So they'll look at a project documents on behalf of an owner and give an opinion about what that would cost, separate from our contractor's opinion of what it would cost. So that reconciliation process was just about to start the last time I met with you folks, and it's now complete. So this slide deck is very similar to what you saw on March 10th, with the updated information about how the reconciliation panned out and where the budget currently stands based on the feedback that we received from you last month. This is the current schematic design that was estimated, showing everything that's included in the plan. And we'll come back to this slide to show you some of the items that would be eliminated in order to save money and come closer to our budget targets. So in the overall cost of work, now I want to just remind everyone that the cost of work is the actual construction cost. That's labor and materials to build stuff, basically. It's not permits. It's not consultants. It's bricks and mortar and the labor to assemble it. So the cost of work was estimated by Whiting Turner at $59,269,000. The third-party estimator brought that in about $1.5 million higher at $60.7 million. The reconciliation process yielded a cost of work price of $59,729,000. So that's reconciled to 1.8%. Our goal in reconciliation was to get within 3 to 5% overall. The next part of the cost estimate, I'm gonna skip past this one and go on to another part of the cost estimate. I'll come back to that one, the cost saving one. So the next part of the cost estimate is general conditions. This is where all the costs for permitting, contingencies, I shouldn't say all permitting, but the building permits, the general contractors or the construction manager's fee, owner's contingency, and that sort of thing. So Whiting Turner, you can see the numbers here. They estimated their general conditions at 12.8. Third party came in. They said, well, we think it's 16.3, and it was reconciled at 14.3, and that's a 14% difference between the reconciled amount and the highest amount. It doesn't really concern me a whole lot. General conditions tend to be estimated differently by everybody who estimates them, and different costs get allocated and accounted for in different ways. And Whiting Turner knows this project better than the third party estimator. So, and some of the material that the third party estimator was working with, they weren't privy to the fact that Whiting Turner had certain fixed fees that are contractual. So I'm not at all concerned about that 14% difference in the reconciliated number. Going back to this slide, these were proposed cost savings that we talked about last time. Some of these items would be done at a later date. It could be designed now or designed later, but done at a later date. So we would add student parking to the project, for example, but not put a cover over it. That's something that could easily be, you could raise money for it at some future time and get that installed at a later date. The student parking lot scope, we pulled that out of the bond project, and I should say out of the re-envisioning bond proceeds, and are proposing that get paid for out of capital, a previous capital bond. I think it was a $39 million bond for the whole district. Replacing the existing gym floor, that was something that we thought still has some life in it, and that was a way to trim the budget and get this in as close as possible. The existing bleachers, it's a no-brainer. Those have to be replaced. But what we're proposing here again is to replace those as soon as possible with previous bonded funds, not the re-envisioning bond. There was quite a bit of discussion at the last meeting about the level of interior finishes, and basically the choice is lower quality and lower cost now, or higher cost now with a better quality and longer lifespan. Most of the feedback we got from the public and from the building committee members and from board members was, let's try to keep quality finished materials in the project as much as possible. So in the reconciled estimate, we kept the higher value items in the project. In other words, we didn't take a deduction there. The other thing that we talked about, and I'll explain this a little bit in more detail about when we can take another look at that schematic drawing. The design, the schematic design right now includes what's been called the Galleria. This is the grand entrance. It is taking what's now the lobby and reconstructing that, deconstructing the whole roof structure and doing an overbuild, adding another story to that, making it very, a vaulted grand space. And that was something that we thought could be trimmed. There was very little program space involved in that feature of the design. And we're struggling to get the best value, so we thought let's take the grand entry away and create better programming space elsewhere. So with that said, the net savings there is $915,000. We also talked about this at last month's meeting, and that's reducing F building renovations. And that it's a pretty drastic reduction, honestly. It means that with F building we would do the minimum to be compliant with ADA, and that's some bathroom improvements and things, but not a whole lot more. That's the details of that is still to be determined, but most of that I think we would include a new roof on that building, if I'm not mistaken, Marty. Do you remember?
No, we're not.
Not with this number. Okay. There was also a lot of discussion about the HVAC system, and it seemed to be pretty universal. I wouldn't say unanimous, but there was strong support in creating a system that would provide building-wide, facility-wide air conditioning. So we did not take a deduction there. The final item in proposed cost reductions was the auxiliary gym. This is an item that is really a standalone. It's designed in a spot on the site where it can be added on later at a later date with other funds in the future. So that brought the cost, that gave us a net savings of 9.2 million, bringing the cost of work down to 50,486,000, reconciled to 1.2%. So this page shows the owner cost. Actually, the list of owner costs is about 30 items long, and we condensed it here. But you can see this owner cost number is fairly consistent across the board, and at 9.4 million, we're going to try to keep CHIP certification in the project. The furniture budget is a little misleading because the original furniture budget pre-bond was $300,000. In the first iteration of schematic design, we bumped that up to $720,000 for furniture budget. Then in this iteration, scratching for every penny we could find. We dropped it again to 360,000. So really, this represents about a 20% increase from the original furniture budget. So this is what we're left with after getting the feedback that folks really wanted to keep the higher quality walls, the concrete block walls, and higher quality floor finishes and air conditioning. We're looking at a total project cost of $73,844,000. That's been reconciled between all the parties at 3.5%. So that's within our target range for reconciliation. So we have a pretty good level of confidence for that number. So that leaves us a target reduction, or we either have to find more cuts, $3.8 million worth of cuts, or additional funding. And at both the Building Construction Oversight Committee and the board, Director Lavery was tasked with rooting through the couch cushions to find as many quarters as he could to see if he could close the gap with some looking at all kinds of different pots of money. So we do have this kind of in a nutshell here, and I'll let Director Lavery talk about that a little bit more detail. You do have a memo from him that does detail it quite a bit. Nathan?
Sure. Thanks, Tom, and good evening, everyone. So we did provide the memo to the board, and I imagine we'll have some additional questions, but just to briefly run through the options we're talking about here. Number one on the list, again, was the seeking a waiver of some of the permitting fees from the city, and that's something that obviously we've begun that process. We don't have a conclusive answer on that question yet. There is the application of the Taft lease proceeds. Those are the proceeds that remain from the leasing of the Taft building to UVM. And if folks may remember that we received $1.6 million from that lease in consideration of the 80 years lease that we gave UVM. And the portion of the money that's been spent so far has largely gone to relocating those programs and fitting up their new spaces. But there's nearly $1.1 million left, and that money we put to the voters with a ballot question. Included in that was the option to use the money for relocation and finding permanent homes for On Top and Horizons, as well as other infrastructure needs. And so this is a permissible use of these funds, and one that, as I looked across the spectrum of options, seemed to make sense. And so that is a big one that we definitely want to call your attention to, and make sure that the board understands the commitment, because again, when we're talking about one-time funds like that, once we spend that money, it's gone and we won't have it in the future. The next item on their capital plan proceeds already earmarked for BHS. We've talked about this before. You might remember that the $39 million capital plan had an allocation for the high school in it, and that was done out of concern that there could be significant infrastructure needs at the high school that would arise prior to getting to the point where we actually had a kind of construction plan for a new high school. So this was essentially to tide us over between the time that we passed the capital plan and when we actually were ready to do high school construction. At this point, we have not needed to access much of that money for BHS. And as a result, we think it's prudent to take $500,000 of that money. That will allow us to do some other work from the BHS re-envisioning project instead of and fund it without having to utilize the $70 million BHS bond. Finally, the last item there is really a collection of multiple strategies that I outlined in the memo. Strategies include utilizing funds that we have available in food service that can be used to purchase kitchen equipment, which are one of the costly items in the owner cost section of the VHS re-envisioning project. There's additionally opportunities, for example, repurposing some leftover money from previous bond issuances when we have completed projects without needing to exhaust all of the funding that we originally envisioned going to those projects, as well as uncommitted fund balances and bond premiums, which is when the city is essentially able to sell its bonds for above the par value of the bonds, which means that if you're trying to borrow $2 million worth of bonding, but because, for example, the city's credit rating is improved, buyers of those bonds are actually willing to pay a little more than $2 million to buy those bonds. And so we actually take in a little bit more in premium than we actually envisioned borrowing, and therefore we have some money left over that we can put to other uses. And lastly, the potential to pay for some of these things kind of as we go, so to speak, out of the property services budget. So that item is a big kind of broad item. One of the keys there that I put in the memo was my intent would be to kind of manage to that number depending on the different opportunities that present themselves throughout the process. A general kind of philosophical approach to managing that money is typically try to use money that has the most restrictions on it first, meaning that if I have a choice between two ways to pay for something and one pot of money can only be used for construction and another pot of money could be used for construction or, let's say, operating expenses or some other thing, you generally try to use the most restricted money first, because that allows you the flexibility to do whatever the board needs to do with the funds that remain if they're not needed. So that's the kind of philosophical approach to managing to those costs.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. I do have an update on or some clarification on the zoning permit. What we had budgeted, and this is pretty typical, is we have building permit fees and we also have zoning permit fees. It's common for the contractor to carry the building permit fees because those fees are tied to inspections, and the tradespeople are responsible for building it and meeting the requirements to pass inspections. So building permits are always in the court of the contractor. Zoning permit fees are more land use related, and those are usually in the court of the owner. So we had, in round figures, a total of about $800,000 in city permit fees in the budget. We did find out just recently, and I hadn't had a chance to change the slide, but we had miscalculated the zoning permit fee, and it's significantly less than 400,000. It's likely to be. It's not a done deal yet because we don't have the final design development estimate yet. But the way that the zoning permit fee would be calculated would probably bring the fees down below $200,000 for zoning permit. Not that we still can't go to them and ask for some relief, but there's already approximately $200,000 there that wasn't there last week. All right. Sorry, folks. My arrows aren't working. I have to use my scroll button, and it gets a little wild. I wanted to use this graphic here to explain a couple of things. One is there's some question about on top and how it's funded and where it would go. Right now, it's slated to be in the third floor of this 3-story addition. This area here, if you can see my cursor, is a new building that connects A building with B building. To orient you, this is the auditorium here. This is the what would be the auxiliary gym. There's B building, D building, and F building. the approximate size of the on top space is roughly, in round numbers again, about 6,500 square feet. Our cost of new construction on this project right now is pegged at about $377 a square foot. So the cost of the on top space is about $2.4 million. The project still contains most of the goals of the original vision of the project, and that's much improved accessibility and full ADA compliance and enhancements, better classroom consolidation, and better configuration of where departments would be and co-location, maker spaces. I'm not going to read the whole list. You can read it, but you can see it still retains most of the big items, the big want and need items from the original plan. There was some discussion about if things could be, anything could be done this summer. This slide was developed, this discussion was started, I should say, before the pandemic. So with shutdowns, it's really hard to predict what we'll be able to construct and when we'll be able to do it. But there's a chance that existing bleachers could be replaced. I'm not so sure about the standalone electrical room. In terms of complexity and size, it could probably be done, but it does have a zoning permit component, and that would potentially slow things down. We think the student parking lot would be a good candidate for summer work. That could be, a bid spec could be put together for that. In-house, I think Marty and his team could do that and get that out to bid and done this summer if construction restrictions are eased a bit. Some of the ADA upgrades to F building could conceivably be done. I like the concept of doing this because, for one thing, interior renovations don't require a zoning permit. They'll require building permits that you can usually get building permits in half an hour, and zoning permits take half a year. So I think F building upgrades could be good. Again, if some of the restrictions are lifted, then it's even conceivable that summer construction in F building could happen and have all these upgrades done or well underway before the fall semester. Possibly some of the asbestos abatement, but that's still a wild card. There are a lot of moving parts here, but there could be some good arguments for getting some of the asbestos abatement done this year. Possibly some of the electrical or some of the structural upgrades, but again, that we don't really feel like we have enough of the design done to do a whole lot on that. At least this summer. So the next steps for this project are for the board to make a recommendation to the Board of Finance. And I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on the design process. There really are three components or three phases of design. And like Claire said, this is the finish line for schematic design. Schematic design is really the first phase of design. The next phase is design development. And that doesn't quite get us to being bid ready. From design development, we go to construction documents. And so it's in the construction document phase or at the end of that phase where things actually go out to bid. We're still hoping to get before the Board of Finance with the board's approval, with the school board's approval. We want to get to the Board of Finance showing the project, lay out the details, the funding, and move on to the design development phase. Revised timeline. If we can begin the design development phase, then by May 1st, we can we'll be resuming the permit inquiry in June. Although that's a long process, a lot of steps, but we can start that process in June or a little earlier. Construction documents could start being created and put together by October. They're talking, our design team is still talking about not having things ready to bid until April or May of next year. We're trying to condense that, and again, the pandemic and the situation with shutdown has really, it's created a lot of uncertainty. So we're not sure how much we'll be able to condense any schedule. It's a 36 to 42 month duration, as it has always been, but it's pushed out to completion in September of 2024. Some people would ask, what would it take to get to the $70 million target without having to spend any more money? And that we'd have to eliminate the air conditioning. We'd have to downgrade the durability of the finishes. Delaying demo, I should say these two items here, the eliminating air conditioning and downgrading the quality of finishes, that only gets us about halfway to closing the gap. If we have a $4 million gap, these combined are a little bit more than 2 million. One idea was to delay the demolition of C building, which has a value of just under $300,000 for demolishing that building. It's short-term savings, but if the building's going to come down, you're still going to have that cost at some point. So it's and it could cost more in the future to take it down. Some big ticket items are the roofs, and so there's a few $1 million, probably a little over $2 million in roofing. But again, those are pretty critical items. There are active leaks that pop up around that whole facility frequently, and those roofs really do need replacement. It's short-term savings, but you don't have a choice about replacing the roofs. They will have to be done, and sooner rather than later. So it's not an easy path to get this to 70 million. And I'd like to quit my talking now and take questions.
So how we will break this down, board members, as for progress, because again, we are going to be time bound to this as well. So everyone will have a chance to ask their questions. What I think we'll do first is categorize it. If you have any questions about the presentation of the building, building specific to Tom, any questions about the financing as it relates to the additional funding presentation and memo from Director Labrie, if that makes sense. So let's start first with, are there any clarifying questions with regards to Tom's, the slide deck that was presented tonight, that we don't want to get in the weeds, but we do want to answer your questions as far as, you know, picking apart the estimates, financial estimates. And again, you know, I'll take questions, raise your hands if you'd like to ask those questions, and then we'll move to the financing Director Labrie part. And do you mind, Mike, taking off so I can see people's faces?
Oh, and you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, if you pull that down and then I guess we'll pick it up, or actually, you know what? I can go through on the top. Is there anyone who has any questions for Tom Peterson, the owner's project manager? Commissioner Wick.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Tom, do you have any idea whether, as a result of this whole pandemic, project price, the price, there'll be a price change at all for raw materials or labor? Do we have any visibility? Because I think all the number crunching was done prior to COVID.
The bulk of the estimating, pretty much all of the estimating, was done prior to the COVID outbreak. You're right. That is one of the hottest topics in the industry right now, is what will this do to pricing and availability. And if you ask 100 people, you'll get 110 opinions. I think there's a lot of evidence that it will not reduce construction prices.
Thank you.
I think the best we could hope for is a neutral effect, but I don't have a crystal ball, but I think there are more forces in place for driving prices up than there will be for savings. We do know for sure already that lead times on equipment, manufactured goods, are going to be stretched out significantly.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Anyone else?
I came prepared, folks. I'm ready for your questions.
I think everyone wants to discuss the funding. So next will be any questions with regards to the funding. We also have our legal counsel, Joe McNeil, here, who rendered to the board in his conversations with Director Lavery, that he indicated to Nathan that in their opinion, the reallocation of Nathan's funding mechanisms are permissible from a legal perspective. He's awaiting, Joe, and I know you're on, and I'm just synopsing for time's sake. The council is awaiting similar confirmation as to the portion relating to the reallocation of remaining capacity from other districts. I'll send this regarding the bond issues. Sorry, I'm pulling up my screen. From the city bond council. But based on their examination and the issue in the oral conversations, we believe there is no legal impediment to the recommendation that the board wishes to adopt. So that's our legal counsel. Joe, you're there. You want to unmute?
Just a brief supplement, if you can hear me, Claire.
Yes.
I have had opportunity to talk to the city's bond counsel, Thomas Maloney, and we had interacted by email before, but on the basis of direct oral conversations, I can confirm that from the standpoint of both your counsel and bond counsel, this reallocation recommendation would be legally permissible.
Thank you. Thanks, counsel. Next, so then counselors who would like to ask questions with regards to the funding of the 3.84, now would be the time to ask those questions. So I'll take hands. So I'll write down names, Waltz, Commissioner Ivanchik, and Commissioner Fisher, and Commissioner Sowers. Okay, so we'll start with Commissioner Waltz.
Well, I think we should all acknowledge that F building is going without that, over the course of the year, we've slowly but surely taken away what we'd hoped to do. That building primarily serves special education kids. And Tom, even though you're talking about foregoing roof work is impractical or it could be more expensive in the future, Marty did say that the roof is not going to be done on F building. And I just think it's kind of a shame that, I don't know, there's a bunch of things going on in my head. It feels morally wrong, but I'm not gonna hold up the project from moving forward. But I feel like we do owe an apology to a lot of kids right now.
So I can speak to that. So currently, F building, so special ed would not be within this re-envisioning plan. Special ed is not in F building. So special ed has been accommodated and is morally how it's existed is definitely has been an issue. But we have given it legs and space ample to their request, and met with all Tracy Rubman and everyone at BHS and special ed. So special ed has been accommodated. And again, Tom, you can speak to this as well, Marty, if there's anything, but we can speak to the conditions. The reason for the exorbitant price for F building, you can talk about ACT, the conditions and what was proposed to be done. And again, we can follow up with more details of what that was.
Well, yeah, F building became one of the more expensive areas to take care of on a cost per square foot basis, primarily because of the extent of the PCB contamination in the exterior caulk of the windows. I don't believe that there's a huge risk in continuing to use the building, and now that we know there are PCBs there, they will have to be dealt with eventually in the future. But the plan for F, if we included it in the project, would mean stripping it of probably more than 50% of its skin and rebuilding a lot of the skin of the building, the whole wrap of the building. It's very, very extensive abatement that would have had to happen, and that really drove the cost. We're not. I got to add, on a personal note, I personally am not taking any of these cuts lightly. I can deliver the news in a dispassionate manner, but I understand that it's painful, and as a former Burlington resident and taxpayer and parent, I feel it.
And we also wanted to research. We have spent time with the funding for the technical centers because of the ascending schools, and looking to funding. And Marty can speak to the upgrades that BTC has had in relation to the lack of upgrades BHS has had. So if you, on a comparison of buildings in need and buildings that have received upgrades, and the fact that BTC will be accessible, and we're making those improvements to make this campus more cohesive with the central campus. Marty, do you want to just speak to those upgrades that BTC has had in the past that
Yes,
puts it in good standing, is what I'm not neglected?
So tech centers are subject to additional funding outside of our general fund, which is, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is called a Perkins grant. So the Perkins grant helps support the tech center programs. So for example, if you were proposing to add, just for as an example, a welding program, the Perkins grant would help fit up that space to meet the welding program's needs. So over the years, the tech center has inherently received additional upgrades to support those programming, those specific programming. That's not to say that it doesn't also need infrastructure upgrades such as electrical, HVAC, and or roofs, but we are saying at this time that we're going to have to put some of those projects off for a later date. But it's definitely overall has received much greater ongoing improvements than the rest of the building.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Vonchik.
Sorry, Claire, are we talking about cuts right now, or?
No, we're talking about funding.
Yeah, so I guess I'm looking forward to hearing the news about really cost savings on the zoning permit. because that's going to be somehow an agreement with the city of Burlington. And then I still am a bit skeptical about the Taft lease and it being okay to use that money. You know, can we legally do that? Where's the Taft money sitting right now? I see from Lavery's note that there was a bond, there was a vote in 2015 about using that money. And I'm just questioning the interpretation of that bond vote because it does mention On Top and Horizons and then other programs kind of as an aside. So those are my questions for now.
This is Joe McNeil, Monica, and board members. I can speak to the basic authority that was provided to the school system by order of the Superior Court, which goes back to 2008. And by way of background, the Taft School was originally constructed via a grant that had some restrictions in it that I won't bore you with, but essentially they required that they be used for educational purposes. And in 2008, the Superior Court of Vermont found that, and I'm quoting directly, the court finds that the city may lease the property with all funds generated by such lease going to the financial support and maintenance of the district's own schools. And then it says to any party who would continue to use the property primarily for educational purposes. So in 2008, which is the last thoroughly substantive court review of Taft, two principles were established. Number one, it had to be continuously used for educational purposes. UVM met that parameter. And number two, any leasehold revenues had to be used for educational purposes. In connection with that court case in 2008, the school district also approached the Attorney General's office, which has a right under the Vermont statutes to have a say with regard to use of this type of property. And the district advised the Attorney General that one of the uses would be for capital improvements. And the Attorney General's office blessed that usage. So we are not troubled by the legal ability to utilize the Taft School proceeds if that's what you would like to do with them. Obviously, that determination is a political choice, but there is no legal impediment in the minds of your council.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Monica.
Next is Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Wolf. So my questions are going to be a lot to Director Lavery around the funding recommendations. And I've had some chats about this, but I realized today that my concern is really around use of funds and impact to taxpayers. Because with the $70 million bond that we put in front of the taxpayers, we didn't say it explicitly, right, legally, but we essentially told them we're going to spend $70 million to renovate the high school. And now we're talking about 73 plus. And I think that I'm okay with saying, hey, there's money like the Taft School money if it's legal, and we are okay with it, that's sitting somewhere that doesn't add a burden to taxpayers. What concerns me is when we talk about using bond money to bridge the gap between 70 and 73, whatever it is. Because that burden, if it's not the bond, even if it's not the bond that they voted on, that bonding, that loaning of money puts the burden on taxpayers. And I'm generally fiscally moderate, but I'm even more so because our economy is shrunk tremendously, right? So I know that there are lots of Burlingtonians who are not in a great financial position who just in March were very generous, who, given another opportunity, may not be so. And so I'm very loath to say, for example, previously bonded construction projects, about 400K, we borrowed that money, and that borrowing goes against the taxpayers. So I guess Dr. Lavery, if you could speak to how much of that $2 million would come from funds that are sitting in an account somewhere, right? Or are coming from either bonding or would come from a budget.
Great, thanks. So I think you have it about right. I mean, and we, as I said before, like at the end of the day, it is, and I think Joe said it well, it is a choice to be made. And so there's the potential to make different choices, obviously, than what we put forward as a recommendation. The question about kind of how much would come from what source. So I laid out a few scenarios in the memo. I should say, though, that what as I kind of discussed when I presented earlier, what I'm not seeking is to be overly prescriptive at this stage with how we would do that. We want to maintain some kind of flexibility so that we can do whatever, kind of is whatever we're best able to do to provide as much flexibility in the future, including potentially to use the, whatever flexibility there is if we can use it to mitigate tax impact. So that's the kind of philosophical intent. Now, to specifically answer your question, so if we start with the example that I provided in the memo, the food service example, that's a case where we could use that money for something else within the food service program, but we couldn't, for example, use it in a way that would defray cost to taxpayers. That's simply not a permissible use of the food service money, because there's a lot of restrictions. It's an enterprise fund, which means it kind of runs like a business, and the money that it kind of makes, if you want to look at it that way, it has to go back into the program. So there's no opportunity in that respect to use that kind of money to buy down the tax rate or do something of that nature. Other examples, as Commissioner Fisher pointed out, we've had some projects in the past where we have borrowed money and we haven't ended up having to spend all of that money on the projects. And so we have the opportunity here to apply some of that leftover money to the high school project. Now, on the one hand, we can't use that money directly to, for example, reduce our operating budget, because we have to use it in a way that is consistent with the municipal bonding rules. But in theory, of course, we could devote that money to one of the projects in a different school and thereby potentially reduce the total amount of money that we would need to borrow in the grand scheme of our $39 million capital plan project. And if we don't have to borrow all that money at the end of the day, we would save the debt service costs, which are borne by our taxpayers through the inclusion of that debt service in our annual operating budget. So in that sense, yeah, kind of down the road, you are right that if we didn't, if we reduced the size of the BHS project and instead allowed that money that was left over or some of those bond premium funds to support the capital plan in other buildings that we've identified, it would potentially mean that we wouldn't need to borrow as much for those other buildings, and that would reduce the future burden on taxpayers. It wouldn't offer immediate relief in the kind of, as I said, kind of immediate wake of COVID-19, but longer term, there would be some opportunity there. And with respect to our property services budget, I don't have a specific number there, but in theory, that's the one where I would say, to the extent that we pay as we go for any of these projects, that we use our operating budget when we have an item that we can purchase that makes sense to use an operating budget for, and we have the money left in our operating budget to do it. If we didn't do that, and we just didn't do the activity at all, we didn't build the thing, we didn't buy the equipment or whatever it might be, then if we didn't otherwise spend that money, then that money would become part of our year-end surplus money, which then is money that we can use, again, on a one-time basis, but we can use it to buy down the tax rate. So there would be some opportunity there to do what you're talking about. I can't say for sure how much we would be able to apply in this case, because again, I don't even have an estimate right now. I'm just wanted to make clear that that's one of those avenues that I would be looking at when I kind of measure the or take the temperature of all of these different sources and try to piece it together as needed.
Okay. And you kind of spoke to my other question, which is, if we use some of this money, what is going to be the impact? What are we not going to be able to do, right? So like the 400K, right? Is that 400K less we're spending on other schools in the district?
Right. So to be clear, and thanks for that, it does not in this case mean $400,000 that we're taking away from an allocation to another school. It's that we've envisioned doing in the future. It's actually leftover bond proceeds that built up over a couple of years from projects we've already completed, but we've had money left over, again, because either we completed the project and it didn't end up costing as much as we thought it might when we borrowed, or because we generated some premiums, that is, and to say that the bonds sold for a little more than their face value, and so we had a little extra money we never even envisioned having. But again, when, not to get too far in the weeds, but when things like the city's credit rating improves, it allows the bonds to sell. They're more attractive to buyers, and so we get a little bit of a premium on those sales.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Anyone with their hand up? Commissioner Sowers?
Yeah, so Mike's questions were very similar to what I had, and they are to you, Nathan, about the financing. Based on some of the memos we're getting about the education fund and the lack of money for next year, and this is the rainy day. I look at the COVID-19 as the rainy day. Is it wise, in your opinion, to be using some of these extra funds for this project? And this ties into Mike's questions, because these were part of my questions as well, currently, or do we go back and find $4 more million or whatever in the bond? I worry about next year a lot. And if we're using extra money in different pockets that we might be able to use next year when we may be struggling even more, is it wise in your mind, because you are the money guru of this, to be doing that?
Right, good question, and certainly timely to in this phase, and it's an unfortunate one that we have to grapple with. So again, I'll kind of answer it in two ways. Generally speaking, for a lot of the sources that we're talking about here, we're restricted in how we can use the money anyway, so it would not present us with an opportunity to kind of directly reduce the budget next year, for lack, or really, I'll say, to reduce the burden on taxpayers next year in response to the fallout from COVID-19. So for the most part, we don't have that flexibility with this money to begin with. But again, as I said, to some degree, there is a certain amount of opportunity here where we could creatively perhaps do that. Again, it would, as I said before, if we're closing, if we're finding, for example, an opportunity to pay for something out of the property services budget this year, which would probably be a last resort, and I'll come back to that, or not last resort, but wouldn't be the first step we would take. But if we did, then that would be a situation where if we chose not to spend that money at all, it would potentially, again, give us a little bit more of a surplus, which would allow us to apply that money to the budget that we next build, and that would reduce the burden somewhat. So it's not, again, for a couple of reasons, I'm not particularly concerned about it in this case. Number one, as I said, for the most part, it's not applicable. But number two, even a situation like that, where we could potentially use money kind of pay as we go for the property services budget, what I talked about earlier, that is the money that would be the most flexible to us if we didn't spend it. So that's at the bottom of the kind of hierarchy of choices here. Again, the idea is that we want to spend the most restricted money first so that we're free to choose how we use the remaining funds. And it could be, for exactly as you're suggesting, the need to kind of temporarily buy down some of the tax impact of our budget or to sustain programming that otherwise we would have to cut. So there's no escaping the fact that there's going to be a huge response, and we don't know what that response is going to look like, but there is going to be a huge response to the education fund deficit at the state level, and know yet what that response will be. We don't know if the state is going to find a way to fill that back, if the state's going to borrow money to fill that, if the state is going to reduce allocations to schools. We really don't know at this time. So I would say that it's not without some amount of risk in that sense, but it's also a relatively small portion of the total package here, and may not we may not end up tapping into those more flexible funds at all to pull this off. So, like ultimately a political choice for you. I don't want to make it seem like there's no impact there, but I think we've mitigated it as much as we could and still get to the target number.
Do you have a sense of how much money that is, though, that is restricted, like that we could use just for this and that we could use for the budget? So say it's not the whole, 2 million that you're suggesting, but you would say 500,000 is definitely, we could use it for this project and nothing else, or, because I'm not looking at this as an all or nothing vote, like it could be that we decide you need to come up with $1 million more or 2 million more, because we don't want to strip it out of our budget in a weak year next year.
Well, right. So again, I want to be clear. It's not that we couldn't use this money for anything but VHS, but in terms of supporting our operating budget, the hard numbers that I put in the memo, I specifically identified the potential for up to $500,000 worth of food service funds toward the kitchen equipment, as well as potentially $400,000 from previously bonded construction projects, and another $900,000 from committed fund balances and bond premiums. Virtually, the vast majority of that, I wouldn't be able to say exactly how much, but potentially 100% of this 2 million will ultimately come from sources that would have been restricted and we would not have been able to use to directly buy down tax rates in response to COVID-19. I don't want to overpromise and say we won't have to do that around the edges, which is why I mentioned potentially utilizing the annual property services budget. I want to have the flexibility if necessary to do that, but I don't anticipate that being more than, I don't know, maybe $250,000 or so to get there.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners with clarifying questions? All right, Mike, are we missing Commissioner Gulick, or is there anyone else? Oh, no, you're there. Great.
Some people have turned off their cameras to.
Okay, sorry, great. I just wanted to make sure
a little
everyone,
privacy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry.
Claire,
all right.
You didn't want to see me eating a snack, so I figured I'd
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Director Lavery. Thank you to Marty Spalding for being present. Thank you to Tom Peterson for being present, and thank you to Joe McNeil. Again, we have the responsibility, this school board has the responsibility as the Finance and Facilities Committee to have worked with the BCOC committee under the auspice of the MOU with the city of Burlington and the mayor. And I wanted to mention, as Tom did last week, we presented this conversation with our BCOC meeting. I see Kate Stein, a community member, is also on and listening in. So it is at this point, if there is no further discussion, my job as co-chair of the Finance and Facilities Committee to present to you a motion to the board, and I will present that motion. It's item 7B on the agenda. And so the motion would be to authorize the use of the remaining TAF lease proceeds and other funds as recommended in the BHS renovation and funding recommendations memo dated April 10th, 2020, submitted by Director of Finance Nathan Lavery to the Burlington School Board of Commissioners. Great. And it was listed on board docs as well. Great. And do I, sorry, am I?
You're muted now.
Are we going to at some point talk about cuts to the whole project, or because looks like this is, the vote is just on the TAF funds and the memo that Nathan Lavery sent to us.
Sorry. Am I unmuted? Yes, we are, when we presented to the board meeting in February, that's when we discussed cuts. So we could have that further conversation after this or at any BCOC meetings as well, for sure. Yep. But sorry. So
I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Carey.
Yes.
All right. All those in favor of, all those in favor of supporting the motion, say aye.
I'm sorry, point of privilege. I'm sorry, point of privilege, Chair.
Sorry.
You do a motion, you do a second, and then there's discussion.
Oh, did you not hear me?
I'm sorry. No.
It's all fuzzy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Commissioner Carey seconded it. Did you?
Yep, we got that.
Carey? And I asked for discussion.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Commissioner Fisher?
I don't know whether I can support this as stated, because it's really giving, and I trust Nate, but $2 million with no oversight by the board of where he's going to get that money concerns me. I don't feel comfortable delegating that quantity of finance decision making.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Anyone else? All right. I can speak to the fact that, and Director Lavery, you're there, that this is a phasing in process. This is a phased project. So each year in September, we as a board go to the city, the Board of Finance, for bonding. And the goal here of tonight's meeting is to recognize and receive the work of the district leaders and the owner project manager that we had hired to present to us the schematic design estimate, and recognizing this estimate at this price, the step forward, and acknowledging our finance director's avenues of additional funding as needed based on the schematic design. Our next step would be to support this based on the recommendation of the BCOC committee. And again, with the understanding and your concerns, all of us share those same concerns, Commissioner Fisher, and it is our hope that given the nature of these projects in a phased in process, that we are doing our due diligence in looking at those restricted funds as stated. We have not gone back to the taxpayers. We have taken the time to make the cuts. And at this time, based on our district leadership and the vetting of this, and again, the board support, I recognize your concern. And again, if there's more commissioners that want to discuss, you can raise your hand. Commissioner Gulick?
Nathan had his hand up before me. Nathan, did you want to go before me?
Oh, I can't see you.
You can go
sorry.
second.
Okay, sorry to bring this up now, Claire. I apologize for not talking about this earlier, but I'm a little bit concerned with where this leaves our pre-K work. If we are really exhausting all of our financial avenues for this project, what's the future of pre-K? That's all. I'll just leave that on the table, but you know that we've worked on that quite a bit as well. So,
yes, Director Lavery.
So I just wanted to clarify a few things in case I made it confusing. Number one, I don't think there's any issue with us ultimately kind of reporting and keeping the board informed on what those other avenues are that we ultimately do apply, right? So this is not meant to suggest that that you're kind of providing an unchecked authority to do this and never speak of it again. No, I'm happy to come back and say, okay, we ended up using $400,000 from food service and so forth, and kind of keep the board informed as far as what we're doing there. That's to be expected, and there's no concern there. And to address the preschool question as well, so I can see how maybe this was a little confusing, but what we are not doing in this scenario is we are not taking funds that were originally envisioned to go and support some of those other elements of the $39 million capital plan. We are not taking those funds and redirecting them to the high school project. Kind of, like the preschool money, for example, is still part of the plan that was envisioned to go to the preschool, and we're not taking that money now saying, well, we didn't build the preschool, so we'll put it toward the high school. Certainly the board, if they wanted to make a change of that nature, could do it, but that's not what we're doing here. Again, what we're doing is saying for projects that are either already completed in the past where we didn't end up using 100% of the bond proceeds to complete them, or again, the premiums and those sorts of things. That's the kind of money that we're reallocating here. We're not taking money away from a project in the future at another school to put toward the high school.
Okay. Commissioner Sowers?
So what happens if, with this process, if we don't approve the motion? What would happen?
So on one of our slides, it was we would go back and to, as the co-chair of the Finance and Facilities Committee, there would be significant concern, only because in what we talked about getting this back down to 70 million, it would be taking out those pieces, such as air conditioning and those building pieces. And, Director Spalding and Tom, you can chime in here as far as, not doing the roof. So I'll let you speak. Director Spalding.
What it also will likely do is prolong the start and the completion of the project. So we already extended this a year so that we're starting it next summer. And you already saw from the timeline that rather than being prepared to go out to bid in January and starting construction in April, we're looking like we're not going to have those bids, the construction materials ready to go out to bid and start construction until June or July of next year, which extends the completion date. The further we kind of extend this now, the greater risk that we lose any construction for next summer completely, which could then extend this project an entire year. As we look to extend this project, that certainly increased costs both in inflation as well as the current contracts that we have in place with the architect and the construction manager. So one, to answer some of the question, if we don't approve this now, then we need to go back and look at making additional cuts. That's probably going to result in losing square footage, which will impact programming. And we will probably have to look at greater cuts than what we're presenting because we're losing the timeline to do the work. So we have to cut more to enable to compensate for that inflation and the extra cost for the general contractor and the architects.
Right, a dollar's worth of cuts in the building are not going to get you a dollar's worth of cuts in the budget, if that makes any sense. I mean, there's a cost to the savings. So like Marty said, that it will increase the cost of engineering and architecture to delay it.
Thank you. I think it helps all the commissioners to know what the flip side is as well when you vote for something or when you don't vote for something, because sometimes I think we don't cover those points in particular, and we need to all understand what this vote means. And so that's That's why I asked the question, because I just think it's important that we all understand what it means if we vote no.
I can put it in maybe more stark terms. This, without this gap funding, as I'll call it, this becomes a really different project. It may be delayed another 6 months to a year, and it would have to be a really different project.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wick?
You're muted. There you go.
Thanks. I would just like to say a couple of quick things. One is more of a point of order, but then one is part of the discussion. Point of order would be, I think we're going to need a, what do you call a roll call vote on this one, because it may not be unanimous. And in terms of discussion, I am just going to state that I'm very much in favor of the motion. I think that under the circumstances, I think Nathan and others have done a good job of finding this money that ultimately is going to be used for the reasons Tom just said. And I think not doing so, I guess to restate just briefly, is going to have a material adverse effect on the project. So I think this is a real important time for us to, in my opinion, say yes to the motion so that we can keep this project on track and, frankly, do it right. And what I mean by that is, let's just take the air conditioning versus non-air conditioning. I personally think that it would be penny wise and pound foolish to put the project in place without air conditioning. So if it's just going to take a little bit of clever extra cash flow to figure out how to find now to keep the project what, in my opinion, it ought to be for generations, I'm very much in favor of saying yes to the motion on the table. Thank you.
Commissioner Vander Putten, sorry.
It's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had to take my headset off. My ears were hurting. So what I'm hearing and what my concern was, would we be stealing from Peter to pay Paul with this funding? And I was also listening and thinking about the legal ramifications, the building permits and the zoning permits, and having some concern about that. And it sounds like these are real problems that need to be addressed now, as opposed to theoretical problems that are going to need to be addressed in the future. And that this money, if it is in fact the most restricted category to be used for this, is the most optimal we can find in this moment for this to go forward. And just anecdotally to what Commissioner Wick was saying about the air conditioning, I teach in a building that was built in 1960. And I don't think they were thinking about climate change then. And 2 years ago in September, we had a day when my classroom was 95 degrees. And the principal came around with popsicles because that's the solution. And it's not an optimal solution for students or teachers to be in those conditions. It really needs to be addressed, and sooner rather than later. So I would say I'd be, having listened to this, I'm fairly new coming into this, but in favor of this motion to at least move forward into the next phase of the process, because I'm also understanding it's a very involved process to do all of the schematic and the design and all of that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Fisher.
So I would offer up an amendment. Share my screen. So amendment to the motion, which puts this rider on the end, with the exception of the use of any funds from debt service outside of the $70 million authorized by the voters in 2018, use of which must be specifically authorized by the board. So whether it's using money from a prior capital project or using money from another kind of debt, anything that's going to add debt to the taxpayers would have to come to us. But if Director Lavery says, hey, there's $400K in the food service that we could shift out of the project and write that kind of stuff, Taft is not debt, that's all, that would be okay. But anything that adds burden to debt burden for the taxpayers we would have to approve. So I'd like to make I don't know what a friendly motion is, but it's being friendly.
Director Lavery?
Just a question of clarification. So again, by and large, what I envision is more like fund proceeds that we already have. So does that fall into this?
Yes.
I would say as was just described, I'd say it doesn't. But if that was your intent, I don't want to take advantage of that as a loophole. If you meant to imply that is included.
Yeah, any funds. I had some other word. Funds from debt service, funds or proceeds. Would that make it more clear? From existing or new debt service? I just don't know the right way to.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think if you're saying that was your intent, then at least if we establish that here, where we're all listening and have a video of it, then I think we can follow that. But I just wanted to make sure. So, for example, if we said, okay, we are going to use some of the capital money that we currently have for the reasons I've described, but we already have the cash. We literally have it in the bank. We would have to come back and say, okay, we're going to take $1 million of that or something, right?
Yes, that's the intent of my amendment,
Proposed
amendment.
Thanks.
Commissioner Wick?
Yeah, I have two questions, or one question and one statement. One question is for Mike, because you proposed the amendment. Your amendment says basically no new debt service beyond the 70. But Nathan's memo already says that he'd like to allocate or use the 500,000 in the capital plan, which is debt service, earmarked for BHS. Are you okay with that, Mike?
Yes, I understand your point.
You guys, can we vote before we vote on the original amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Vote on the
Yes,
original.
please.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I don't mean to say please, but I mean, there's a formal process for amending a motion. It's so hard to do this like on Zoom, but all right.
The amendment has not been
Okay, so
seconded.
say that, Superintendent Ray?
The amendment has not been seconded.
I just think we should vote on the original motion before we make an amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner Gulick. So Commissioner Carey had seconded the motion.
No, I have not. I have not seconded. I'm pointing out on point of order. I'm stating that the amendment has not been seconded. We shouldn't
Not
even
the amendment,
discuss it.
the original motion.
Oh, okay. Yes,
Thank
I did. Yes. Okay. I did
Okay.
second the original motion.
So this is the original motion, right? This one right here.
Yes, yep. So we were opening up for discussion, and so the next step would be to vote on the motion, and then Commissioner Fisher, if you wanted to amend the motion as passed.
If I could intervene, that's not typical parliamentary procedure. I'm sorry.
Right.
Typical parliamentary procedure is that if there is a proposed amendment made to a main motion, the first question is whether there's a second. So far, I've not heard a second. But if there was a second, then the amendment needs to be dealt with prior
First.
to the main motion
Thanks.
as
Okay.
part of parliamentary procedure.
So in crafting the amendment, Commissioner Fisher, we're in the process, Commissioner Gulick, of crafting his amendment based on the newness of, adding to this amendment. So Commissioner Fisher was working it out with Director Lavery. So at this point, in Commissioner Wick's comments, give us 2 minutes to complete the amendment, Commissioner Fisher.
Can I interject from what Joe just said? If the amendment has not been
Seconded, right.
It
Understood.
did. Okay.
Yes,
did not.
understood. We were looking for a second after the actual amendment is complete. I hear you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe.
My other quick question is, don't we have to go to the board before we can add money anyway to the tax dole? Right? Wouldn't this have to come to the board anyway?
Yes, Director Lavery for bonding.
We are not, again, we're not talking in here about issuing new debt. That's not what's envisioned by those solutions that we put forward. So we've already, for example, included in next year's budget the issuance of new debt to support the high school project. Not 100% of it, but a big chunk of it. So there's nothing in terms of the kind of scenarios that I outlined that talk about getting a new authorization for debt, with the exception of the fact that, again, we've got the $500,000 from the existing capital plan that we have not borrowed yet. So that's the one piece where I would agree with that. But for the other parts that we've been discussing, we're not talking about going out and issuing new debt. We're talking about bond proceeds that we already have.
Okay. All right. So is there, Commissioner Fisher, are you finished with your writing?
Yep. And this I think addresses Jeff's point, which is was it 2016, that original capital bond for the rest of the district?
39 million bond?
So
yeah, it was
so
19 additional.
All right, Commissioner Fisher.
Michael, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2017.
Thank you.
All right, so I just want to address, again, this motion was intentionally not prescriptive. And so with that being said, we have spent a lot of time, Director Lavery and the team, in presenting this motion. Is there a second on Commissioner Fisher's amendment to the motion? Sorry.
I just want a clarification of part of the amendment, because I thought we are using 500,000 from the 2017 capital bond.
So
we have 4 points. We had in Lavery's, right. One up from there.
So I'm
right
trying
here.
to say it's okay to use this.
In
It's
your
okay to
amendment.
use this. It's okay to use the 70, but any part of this 2 million that we're looking that gap to bridge that gap, if this is going to take, whether it's 400K or whatever it's going to be, if we're going to take capital funds that we've borrowed money and their proceeds, that the board has to authorize that use.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ivanchik. Okay. Director Lavery, is there any discussion from you with regards to, well, I got to stop typing, Mike.
Just trying to make it clear.
Yes, thank you.
I think we understand the intent here. So I guess I don't have any more questions. I think the risk, I guess, in my mind, and I don't know, I can't frankly assess how much of risk this is, but by kind of equivocating, let's say, to some degree, with the motion, my fear would really be at the City Board of Finance, and that they would say, well, is the board behind, do you have the money to complete this project or not? And my worry would just be that if someone had an interest in slowing this down or not seeing this come to fruition, that they might point to this and say, well, the board hasn't really solved the problem here, and therefore, why should the Board of Finance approve it? I don't know that would happen. I would just say that's the one concern I would have with kind of leaving it a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not you're really, you really close the $4 million gap.
Thank you, Director Lavery. Any other commissioners that I haven't heard from? So we have Director Spalding, Superintendent Obeng. Do you have your hand up? Yeah, so Director Spalding, Superintendent Obeng, and then Commissioner Wick.
So I understand the intent, but I just wanted to point this out as well. And I may be mistaken, but the way I read this is the intent is that we need to go back to the board for approval at the time we decide to use these funds. And obviously the board's intent is to approve the use of those funds. But what if by the time we bring this forward won't be at least until we go out to bid, or maybe even until we get to the end of the project and we exhaust all of our contingency funds? And those could very well be completely different board members, and those board members may not approve these funds, and we won't have those funds available. Does that make any sense? Like, we're looking for authorization for use of funds so that we can keep moving forward, and this doesn't give that full authority. I understand the reason why the board wants to, not give the latitude, but I don't think you are giving the latitude. I think you're voting now that you're using those funds for the project now. So you are theoretically making that a board decision and not so much, for Nathan to use at his discretion decision.
Thank you, Director Spalding. Superintendent Obeng?
Yeah, just kind of watching the process here and just trying to get clarity around it. 'Cause I think we might be kind of talking about the same thing. We had a main motion that had a first and second. There was discussion, and then there was introduced a friendly-ish amendment. And I don't know if you've gotten a second for it, but you're having a lot of conversation on a second. So I was just trying to figure out in terms of if you follow the proper order and to be focusing on the real question, because the friendly amendment is starting to get longer and longer, and I'm not sure if you're getting to the original question or the original intent that the amendment was proposed. And probably you'll need Joe to clarify the process, but I think Joe attempted to clarify the order, but I'm not sure if we totally understood that in the way that the conversation is proceeding now.
Yeah, so we did get a second from Commissioner Ivanchik, and Joe explained that we needed to include the amendment if we're going to vote on the motion.
So you've got a second on the friendly motion, and you have a discussion now on the friendly amendment.
Amendment, yes. Yes. Joe?
Yes, so the first vote at the end of the discussion would be whether the amendment would be approved. If the amendment is not approved, you're back to the main motion unamended, and you proceed immediately to that. If the amendment is approved, then the next question is whether the main motion as amended would be approved.
Thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Wick?
Yeah, speaking to the motion at hand, which is to say Mike's amendment, which has gotten a second. I'm still trying to understand it. I think that any motion we make really needs to be very clear and unambiguous. And so in Nate's memo, I guess what Mike must be, I'm surmising Mike and asking maybe for some kind of a response from Nate and or Mike, but there must be something in paragraph 4 of Nate's memo that concerns Mike. And it must be, and then Mike, if you could just put back your motion. Yeah, it says that basically we can't use proceeds from existing debt service. I'm not sure I understand existing debt service. Is that the part where Nathan said, guys, we got some extra money from some previous or existing debt service that we could use? Is that the little bit that you're worried about, Mike? Or is there more? Because I don't see more, but I do see that bit.
That is, you are correct. It is this, I think it's this one, this right here.
And so you're saying you don't really want that to be part of tonight's approval. You want to defer that approval to the future.
I feel like I'm uncomfortable approving the use of that tonight. I think everything else in here I'm okay with.
And can you just say why for the group? Because you proposed the amendment. Why are you-
Because if it were not for the BHS bond, what would happen to that money? That money would either go towards a capital project elsewhere in the district, and if it's unexpected proceeds from the sale of a bond or something like that, that means we could potentially reduce capital expenses somewhere down the line, therefore reducing the burden on taxpayers. All of this, for me, is we can't treat the taxpayers like a bank. It's not that. We are the taxpayers. We're borrowing money that they have to pay interest against, and so if we are increasing the tax burden and going above the $70 million, I don't think that is what the taxpayers generally thought that they were agreeing to.
Okay, so I got it. So then I just wonder, so that we don't have to interpret your amendment language, can you just be more direct in your amendment? This would be my suggestion,
Sure.
Which would be essentially, instead of with the exception of everything you've written, with the exception of, and then quote the part of Nathan's memo that you don't want to approve. Or basically say, but you can't use, and then quote the part of Nathan's memo that is offensive to you. And then then the board will be able to vote on your amendment, in my opinion, very clearly. And we'll see who agrees and who disagrees. And I respect what you're doing here. I may disagree, but I get it.
If I could offer a hopefully helpful suggestion, Michael, consistent with your colloquy with Commissioner Wick, I would just say potentially 400,000 of bond proceeds. That way you don't have to. The term debt service is a little bit confusing, but essentially it's $400,000 worth of bond proceeds that you want, if I'm understanding it correctly, the project to have to come back to the board for specific approval.
Well, I think it's this. I don't think we even need to put an amount in there. Right? That's the line. And I don't know what what did you say? Colloquy?
I'm sorry.
That's an SAT word. It's been a while for me.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying bond proceeds from previously bonded construction projects.
Bond proceeds.
While Mike is typing, can I just say that I'm uncomfortable with making edits to motions and not having like sufficient time to process it before voting, especially an important one like this.
You say you're not comfortable?
No, I'm not.
All right,
The only additional suggestion I would make, Michael, is that it should be previously rather than previous.
And then remove the quotes?
Yes.
Okay.
Mike, would you be willing to withdraw your first motion and then remake this one and see if you get a second, just so that we can follow procedure?
Sure. I withdraw my original motion, and I make this. I draw my previous amendment, and I put forward this amended amendment.
Does Commissioner Ivanchich want to second it because she did the first one?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. So go ahead, Commissioner Wick.
Oh, it's okay. Now I guess we're back to discussion on the amendment.
Yes. So
I think the amended amendment is more clear.
anyone else for discussion on the amendment?
Yeah, does this take away then the uncertainty, I think that Nathan and Marty, you were raising enough?
I mean, I think it doesn't, in the sense that what we're saying is we don't really have $74 million, give or take, but we don't have that money to work with. So I think the challenge will be, again, at the Board of Finance level, where we need to present them with a plan that we can say we can afford. So that would be, again, my concern with, with this language.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Commissioner Wick.
Only if others. I know I've spoken too much.
Yep, I don't see any other hands up.
I'm going to say then, now that I understand what Mike's asking, although I respect it, I'm not in favor of the amendment, because I would like, for the reasons I said before, us to have enough money from all the sources that Nathan's memo outlined in order to move forward with confidence to the Board of Finance and beyond.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, then we will move to Commissioner Wick. Do you want to lead us in the, I'll do the roll call as well, but will help me out with the voting on the amendment to the motion?
Sure. Would you like me to be the first one to say yay or nay, or what? I'm sorry, my apologies.
That's okay. Yes.
Okay. Are you tracking it, Mike or Claire?
I am.
All right.
So this is
I'm not.
the amendment.
Sorry, Mike, but nay, with all due respect.
The amendment.
The
Commissioner Alwell. Commissioner Alwell.
No.
Commissioner Hadji.
Nay.
Commissioner Gulick.
Nay.
Commissioner Carey.
Nay.
Commissioner Ivanchik.
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yes.
Commissioner Gorman.
Let me see if I can unmute him. Hold on. Commissioner Gorman.
Nay.
Commissioner Waltz.
Nay.
Commissioner Van Putten.
Nay.
1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Me, can I vote?
Where are you? Commissioner Sauer. Sorry, I'm looking.
It's all right. No, but I understand why you've done it.
Who am I missing?
I think you're good yourself. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got your vote, Eric. Thank you.
I know. I'm trying to mute myself so I'm not.
Oh.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman. Yes, we have it. So the amendment fails. So back to the original.
Okay, Chair Wolf.
Yes.
This is Bonnie. Who was after Commissioner Vanderputten?
So I have all the votes. Everybody said no, except for Monica and myself, and Chair Wool did not vote.
Thanks. So next would be voting roll call on the amendment, the motion, excuse me. All those in favor of the motion without the amendment, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Wick.
Yes.
Commissioner Alwell.
Yes.
Commissioner Gulick.
Yes.
Commissioner Hadji.
Yes.
Commissioner Carey.
Yes.
Commissioner Gorman.
Yeah.
Commissioner Fisher.
No.
Commissioner Ivanchik.
Yes.
Commissioner Vanderputten.
Yes.
Commissioner Sowers.
Yes.
Commissioner Waltz?
Yes.
Then the motion has passed. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Director Lavery. Thank you, Council McNeil. Thank you for Director Spalding, and thank you for Superintendent Obeng and walking us through this very important step in the process. And thank you, Owner's Project Manager Tom Peterson, for being here and online. And thank you to Kate Stein, the member of the BCOC committee online as well. Again, this is a phasing in project, and we look forward to updating you on next steps with regards to the BHS re-envisioning project. But this was a very critical presentation and discussion, and it's just the beginning. And I thank you for your support and commitment and the finance on behalf of the finance facility. We have worked very hard. Part of our commitment and in hiring a third-party estimator was to get our numbers in check, and at the expense of not going back to the taxpayers and asking for more money. As we've seen with South Burlington, the scope and scale of this project, we have spent a tremendous amount of time in determining how to deliver on the promises that we as a board and prior boards met in successfully securing a $70 million bond. And being right now the only district in the state that received that support from taxpayers, we take our jobs very seriously, and we appreciate your support and moving forward. Thank you very much. So I think at this time we would ask for a break, a 5-minute break. We do have to be very fresh for our next order of business, which will be going into exec session. So at this time, Commissioner Fisher, can you advise me or the board and the district leaders on what you think for a break and what that means? Everybody keep themselves live, or we have a separate link?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wool. So my suggestion is that we make the motion to move into executive session. We all have a link to a different Zoom meeting that's private. And so we will take a break, however long you want to take a break, and we will meet in that different Zoom meeting. So for members of the public, we will come back to this Zoom webinar when we are done our executive session. We don't anticipate any motions. Is that correct, Chair Wool?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't anticipate any other action other than to adjourn the meeting. But the members of the public are welcome to stay. And if you're watching on RETN, they are going to disconnect. So you can always join the Zoom meeting and stay until the end. And this webinar will stay open.
So it is 9 o'clock. So if we could reconvene and click on the link by 9:10, we give ourselves a 10-minute break. I would appreciate that, and we'll be in executive session. So may I have a motion to move into executive session?
Yes, I move to consider executive session under 1 VSA 313A to discuss the Department of Justice agreement with board counsel.
And
I would like to second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Waltz. Thank you, Commissioner Waltz. So Commissioner Waltz is the second. All those in favor
Yes.
of executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right, we'll move to executive session. Thank you, board.